Hi, my name is Kaylin, and the night my own brother tried to humiliate a poor waitress in a luxury French restaurant was the night he erased me without realizing I was standing right in front of him. He ordered in an obscure French dialect, slow, mocking, loud enough for the whole room, just to impress his girlfriend, just to remind everyone who had money and who didn't. What he didn't know? That waitress was his sister. The sister who gave up a Sorbonne PhD, who gave up her future, who gave up her voice, to sit by our dying father's bed while he built his life on my silence. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I answered him, calmly, in perfect French. And in that moment, everything he stole from me came back to collect its debt. Before we dive in, what time is it where you're listening from, and where are you right now? Drop it in the comments. Because what you're about to hear might hurt more than you expect. Thursday nights at Maison Varenne were never quiet. The polished glass, the ivory table linens, the steady hum of clinking glasses and laughter just below the surface. It all wrapped around me like background noise I wasn't supposed to exist in. I moved through it like a shadow, tray balanced on one hand, heels silent against the herringbone floor. My name tag just said K, clipped beside a pressed white blouse. No last name, no story, no history. At 7:12 p.m., I stepped through the arched glass doorway from the kitchen with a tray of amuse-bouches. That's when I saw him, Silas. He swept in like he owned the place, which, in his mind, he probably did. Armani shirt open just enough to show a hint of tanned collarbone, sunglasses still pushed high on his head, despite the dusk. His arm was slung around a woman who looked like she had Botoxed her way through her 20s and now clung to 30 with manicured claws. Amber. Two men in sleek suits followed, talking loudly in clipped finance speak. The kind of voices that didn't lower out of politeness because they never had to. I turned quickly, ducking behind the Maitre d's podium as if checking the reservation list. My heart thudded once, sharply. Silas, my brother, 10 years apart, 100 worlds away. He didn't see me. Of course he didn't. When they were seated, table 6 near the window, I was the one assigned to their section. Of course I was. I didn't argue. I never argued. Instead, I smoothed my apron, took a breath that tasted like fear and lemon butter, and walked up to their table. Bonsoir, welcome to Maison Varenne, I said softly. Would you like to begin with a glass of... He didn't even glance up. Amber was scrolling through her phone. Ugh, what's the point if they don't have Dom by the glass? She muttered, loud enough for me to hear. One of the men laughed. Tell her to bring the good stuff in French, he said. That's when Silas spoke. It was deliberate. I could hear it in his voice, the way he twisted his mouth around the syllables like they were props. He ordered in a version of French that was both obscure and butchered, some ancient rural dialect no Parisian waiter would even recognize. But I did. He smirked as he finished, as if daring me to correct him. I didn't. I just nodded. Very well, I replied, perfectly, in the kind of French only a Sorbonne PhD would dare to speak aloud. The accent was crisp, Parisian, unmistakable. He blinked, but didn't really look at me. Amber leaned in. Cute waitress, she said to Silas, but clearly not too bright. A small ripple of laughter fluttered around the table. My cheeks warmed, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned and walked back to the service station, hands steady. That's when I saw it. A folded napkin, white and soft, waiting to be placed. Without thinking, my fingers moved the way they used to when we were kids. The long edge bent in, the corners tucked, the folds sharp and precise. Within seconds, it became a swan. Elegant, silent. When we were children, Silas and I used to fold napkins on weekends while our father rested. It was our quiet rebellion, a way to say we mattered, even if no one noticed. His swans were always crooked, mine always flew. I placed the swan beside Amber's plate, not Silas's, but just within his view. He looked at it for a moment. A flicker of something passed over his face. Then he turned to Amber and laughed about a deal closing in Zurich. He didn't remember. I did. I stepped away, took another table's order, smiled at a couple celebrating their anniversary, and refilled a wine glass. Every movement felt measured, like I was dancing a ballet no one else could see. At 8:04 p.m., a French couple in their 50s sat at table 4. As I approached, the man greeted me with a soft bonsoir. And just like that, I let go. My words flowed naturally, full sentences, playful inflections, all of it. They smiled warmly, complimented my accent. "You sound Parisian," the woman said, delighted. "I studied there," I replied. That was all I said. I didn't mention the scholarship, the doctorate, the years teaching at Sorbonne, the decision to leave it all behind. My hands poured the wine, but my mind floated elsewhere. Silas used to call me the walking dictionary when we were kids. It was teasing, but not cruel, before everything turned. He hadn't recognized me, not even a flicker of pause. And honestly, that hurt on more than the arrogance. By 9:11 p.m., their entrees had been cleared, laughter still spilled from their table. I cleared their plates with care. Silas finally looked up at me. "Merci," he said, mocking again. The word dropped from his lips like an afterthought. I only nodded. When I brought out the dessert menus, I noticed Amber tracing the napkin swan with her finger. "Did the waitress make this?" she asked. Silas glanced, shrugged. "Must have been the kitchen staff. Cute gimmick." A pause. "We should do that for the engagement party," she added. My stomach nodded, but I smiled. "May I offer the tarte tatin? It's a favorite among our guests." The moment passed, but not for me. Somewhere inside, a fire had lit. They didn't know me, but they would. The fire didn't rush through me. It settled. It moved slowly, like heat traveling under skin, not visible yet, but impossible to ignore. I carried it with me as I turned back toward the service station, adjusted the stack of plates on my tray, and stepped through the swinging door into the narrow hallway beside the kitchen. The noise dulled there. Laughter from the dining room became distant, blurred by the hiss of sauté pans and the low murmur of cooks calling orders. I leaned my shoulder against the cool tile wall and let my head fall back for just a second. Just one breath. The hallway smelled like butter and citrus zest. Familiar, safe. My fingers curled into my palm, pressing lightly, grounding myself. From the other side of the wall, I could still hear Silas's voice, too loud, too confident, rising above the others. He was telling a story. He always told stories when he had an audience. People laughed on cue. That sound used to mean something to me. For a moment, I wasn't there anymore. I was standing behind a podium in Paris, lights warm on my face, my notes untouched because I didn't need them. The room had gone quiet, not the awkward kind, but the attentive kind. I spoke without thinking, each sentence precise, fluid. When I finished, there was a pause, then applause, not polite, real. I spotted my father in the back row, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket, nodding like he'd known all along. That night, my phone rang. I stepped away from the reception, my heels echoing against marble floors, and answered. The voice on the other end was careful. Too careful. Stage 4, aggressive. They were sorry. I booked a flight before dawn. I never went back. The clatter of a dropped pan snapped me out of it. Someone brushed past me with a tray, apologized without looking. I straightened, rolled my shoulders, and returned to the floor. Time had moved on without asking me. At table 6, the appetizers had arrived. Amber was already halfway through hers, leaning back in her chair like the room belonged to her. One of the men was gesturing with his fork, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his glass. Silas spotted me this time. "Hey," Amber said, tilting her head, eyes scanning me like I was a puzzle she didn't care to solve. "So, what do you actually do? I mean, this can't be your real thing, right?" The question landed heavier than she intended, or maybe exactly as heavy. The men chuckled. Silas smirked, resting his elbow on the table. "Yeah," he added. "What's the long game here?" I set the water pitcher down carefully, the base touching the table with a soft click. I met her eyes. "This is my real job," I said. There it was, clean, simple. Silas laughed. "Sure, and I'm the Pope. She probably majored in croissants." The table erupted. I didn't feel small, not exactly. It was more like standing very still while a wave passed around me. I waited for the sound to die down, then spoke, not louder, just clearer. "Actually," I said, turning slightly toward him, "the term you used earlier for the sauce doesn't belong to that region. It's a provincial variation that fell out of use after the 17th century. The words came out smooth, natural. French shaped my mouth the way it always had. I corrected the pronunciation, gently, perfectly. For the first time all evening, the table went quiet. Amber blinked. One of the men frowned, glancing between Silas and me. Silas opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if searching for something clever to say and coming up empty. I didn't wait. "I'll be back with your entrees shortly," I added, already stepping away. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. A laugh tried and failed to restart. I walked to the kitchen with my back straight and my hands steady. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my face stayed calm. That mattered. In the kitchen, the chef raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay out there?" "Just fine," I said. And it was. Not because they'd been kind, but because I hadn't bent. When I returned with the plates, Amber avoided my eyes. Silas was talking again, louder than before, as if volume could patch over whatever had cracked. He misused another term on purpose this time, exaggerating the accent. I said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, could be sharper than correction. As I set the plates down, he glanced at me, studying my face like he was trying to place something he'd misplaced years ago. The look didn't last. It never did. They ate, they drank. The night moved forward, and as I stepped away, I realized something with a strange kind of clarity. He laughed at me, but he had no idea I'd once been invited to teach at the very institution he was pretending to quote. He didn't know, and I didn't tell him. I left the table area after clearing the empty appetizer plates, my tray balanced neatly on one arm. I didn't linger, not because I was flustered, but because I wasn't. There was a calmness to it now, like a curtain had lifted. They still saw a uniform, not a woman, a role, not a story. I slipped through the kitchen door again, past the heat of open flames and the sharp aroma of lemon butter. No one stopped me as I ducked into the side hall, the one near the dry pantry where the light flickered if you leaned on the wall too hard. I leaned anyway. And then, as if the past had just been waiting for a quiet moment to knock, it opened. It had been 3 years. Spring in Austin had been mild that year. Bluebonnets blooming early, breeze warm by midday. The university had planned a full gala in my father's honor. 50 years of service, tenure, multiple departments, beloved by students and colleagues alike. The whole thing was organized in under 6 weeks, but you'd have thought it had been in planning for a year. Faculty, donors, former students, all descending on the old estate that night like it was the social event of the season. I remember walking into the foyer with a tray of crab puffs, my black slacks pressed, blouse tucked in. I wasn't a guest. I was on kitchen rotation, again. Silas had offered to cover things that evening so I could relax. But when the caterer arrived short-staffed, guess who ended up filling in without hesitation? Not that I needed thanks, just acknowledgement. The program booklet was glossy, thick, the kind you keep in a drawer long after the event's over. I had picked one up while refilling water glasses, casually, between passes. I flipped through it standing behind the grand staircase, and there it was. Keynote speaker, Mr. Silas Rowe, sole child and devoted caregiver of Professor Edwin Rowe. My name wasn't in the acknowledgments, not in the brief biography, not even in the photo captions, where I was clearly in 2 of the shots, standing behind my father's chair, hand on his shoulder. Just labeled event staff. It was a slip, I told myself, an oversight, but it wasn't. It was a rewrite. During Silas's speech, I stood near the back, in earshot. He started with jokes, always did, then moved into this tender little recollection of holding Dad's hand through chemo, how sending him poetry from Paris kept his spirits up. The guests ate it up, someone teared up. I heard gasps. I felt like I was floating, watching a different version of my own life being performed like a school play. A woman I vaguely knew, an old family friend who used to bring lemon cookies on Sundays, approached me near the hors d'oeuvre table. "Oh, I didn't know he had a sister," she whispered, glancing toward the stage. I smiled. "Yes, well, sometimes I forget too." She laughed, thinking I was joking. I excused myself to the restroom, locked the stall door, and sat on the closed lid for 5 whole minutes, just breathing. That night, I cleaned up until 1 a.m. Dad was asleep in his room before dessert had been cleared. Silas was nowhere to be found. I carried 2 garbage bags to the bins behind the estate, still in my flats, heels packed away. The moon was bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. And that was it, the night my name was erased from my own father's story. Back in the present, I stared at the hallway wall, paint chipped near the baseboard. A server brushed past me with a stack of ramekins. The hallway had that back-of-house chill, refrigerated air laced with steam and citrus. I checked my apron, adjusted my collar, stepped back toward the pass. The laughter had started up again at Silas's table. I took a slower route past them this time. Just a glance, that's all I meant. But I saw it, his hand resting near his glass. A faint scar, diagonal, pale but new. Not childhood, recent. And the way he jerked slightly when his phone lit up, just for a second, an involuntary flinch. Then he turned it face down, voice raising, back to full performance. Power looks like polish on the outside, but fear, real fear, shows in the hands first. I kept moving. In the staff area, I picked up my water bottle and caught sight of my name tag clipped to the wall hook. Kaylin. I'd corrected it twice last week. Still wrong. It didn't hurt, not in the way it once might have. It felt almost poetic now. Because sometimes your name disappears from things quietly. From a name tag, a program, a memory, and by the time you notice, it's already gone. But it doesn't mean you are. I unclipped the badge, held it in my palm, and smiled. Because tomorrow, I'd bring my own, a real one. If they could erase my name from a program, they could erase me from anything. The badge stayed in my pocket all night. I didn't even set it down when I got home. I just dropped it, along with my keys and shoes, on the kitchen counter and let it sit there like a little paperweight of insult. The next morning, the sky over Houston hung heavy and gray, not quite raining, not quite dry. I arrived 15 minutes early for my breakfast shift at Maison Varenne, hair pinned tight, apron folded in my bag, same as always. My feet still ached from the night before, but I didn't care. I'd survived worse than foot pain. There was a new manager at the host stand. Bryce, barely in his 20s, skin still too soft to have learned how the world cuts. He offered a tight-lipped smile and didn't meet my eyes. I greeted him anyway. "Morning?" "Yeah, hey, hang on." He reached for something under the counter, but then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he walked me to the side hallway near the server's entrance, where schedules and section charts were usually taped to the wall. My name wasn't on it. Not under Station 3, where I'd worked every Thursday morning since January. Not anywhere. "Looks like I'm not assigned?" I asked, more as a courtesy than confusion. I already knew this wasn't a mistake. Bryce gave a nervous shrug. "Can you step into the office for a sec? Ms. Dillard wants to speak with you." I followed without a word. The back office smelled like day-old coffee and plastic binders. The blinds were drawn, leaving a weak yellow glow across the desk. Ms. Dillard sat behind it, arms crossed, face pinched in that polite but accusatory way restaurant managers perfect over years of handling guest complaints and employee excuses. "Kaylin," she said, not even attempting to say it right. I sat. "Yes." She clicked her pen once. "We had a situation last night." I didn't speak. I just waited. She liked control. They always do. "A guest has reported that a $300 gift card was placed inside their check folder and is now missing. It was processed at your station." I blinked once. "Was it Silas?" Her expression didn't shift, but her voice sharpened just slightly. "It came from the table under Mr. Rowe's name, yes." "Amber's doing," I said flatly, not asking. Her pen clicked again. "She says she placed it in the folder before handing it back to you. He confirms it was there." "He confirms?" I repeated. "As in, he thinks it might have been?" "He says he saw her put it in." I nodded slowly. "I see." I reached into my apron pocket, pulled out my phone, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward her. "This is the photo I took when I brought the folder back to the terminal. It's empty. No card, no slip, just the bill." Her eyes scanned it, then flicked back up at me. "Why do you take photos of the folders?" "Because I've worked in enough places to know how these things go, especially when there's family involved." There was a silence, long and stale. She set the phone down gently. "You understand, we can't prove anything either way. But when a guest reports, let me stop you there," I said calmly. "You can't prove anything, but you've already decided who you believe." Her mouth opened, closed. "You want me to say something that will make this easier? Or you want me to fight so you can label me difficult?" I reached behind me, untied my apron, folded it, and set it neatly on the desk. "If you've already decided who I am, nothing I show you will change it." I stood. "I'll collect my things." She didn't stop me. Outside the office, Bryce stood awkwardly near the espresso machine, pretending to read the syrup inventory sheet. I nodded once as I passed him, not with anger, but with that peculiar calm that comes when you've reached the end of something long before anyone else admits it. I grabbed my things from the locker, my coat, my book, the name tag with the YEE. Someone still thought belonged in my name. I slipped it into my pocket again, not out of habit, but out of principle. As I walked past the dining room, I could see the morning regulars beginning to arrive, lawyers and real estate agents, and old couples who liked soft eggs and stiffer coffee. One of them looked up and smiled. I smiled back. They thought they'd kicked me out. What they didn't know, that walkout was just my opening move. By the time I got back to my apartment, the drizzle had turned into a steady pour. Rain pelted the windows like fingers tapping, never stopping. I didn't even take my coat off. I just stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the dented kettle hissing gently on the stove. It was 6:03 a.m. I stirred a spoonful of instant coffee into hot water and watched the granules swirl like they didn't want to dissolve either. Then I sat down at the tiny kitchen table I'd bought secondhand from a student moving out in a rush. The vinyl chair creaked beneath me. I didn't mind the sound anymore. It was the only thing that reminded me I was still here. My phone buzzed once. I glanced at the screen. Dr. Eloise. A name I hadn't seen in over 2 years. The text read, "Saw a posting for a visiting linguistics fellow at the Sorbonne. Thought of you." I didn't reply. My thumb hovered, but the words wouldn't come. Not thank you. Not I'm doing well. Not even why now. Instead, I just locked the screen and flipped the phone face down. The rain was louder now, the kind of rain that made the air feel like grief. And just like that, my memory cracked open, taking me back 2 years, to that bitter afternoon in the faculty lounge at the University of Houston. The air had smelled like burnt coffee and powdered donuts, the kind they always put out for budget parties. There were balloons tied to the back of a chair, pink and gold. A crooked, "Good luck, Kaylin" banner hung on the wall, the E in my name written backward. I remember smiling politely as Cassandra, my supposed best friend in the department, adjusted her scarf 3 times in the hallway mirror before walking in like she hadn't been rehearsing all week for that moment. I'd handed in my resignation that morning, gave the department my full 2 weeks' notice. No drama, no grand explanations, just family. Everyone assumed it meant I was overwhelmed, burned out. "Kaylin just couldn't handle the pressure," someone had whispered near the fruit tray. But I'd handled everything. I was the one who stayed when our father forgot how to walk. The one who sat beside him through chemo, listened to him breathe through the night, waited through silence and morphine and hospital alarms. I gave up France. I gave up my research. I gave up the version of myself that knew how to want things. And Cassandra? She used the farewell to pitch herself for the grant I'd just stepped away from. I mean, Kaylin's work was brilliant, of course, she'd said, her voice dipped in sympathy. But maybe it's time for someone with more flexibility to lead the next phase, someone who can be fully present. That sentence had stayed with me. Fully present. God, what a phrase. It sounded so harmless, like a soft apology you couldn't argue with. But I had been too present. Present at every scan, every check-in, every day Dad forgot where he was. I was present in the way people don't want to be reminded, sleepless, hair unwashed, carrying grief like a second skin. Silas didn't come to the farewell. He didn't even send flowers. That wasn't surprising. What shocked me, what split something deep, was that not one person asked where he was, as if I didn't have a brother, as if I'd always been alone. I came home that night to a voicemail. It was Dad, his voice thin, raspy. "I know what they're saying about you, Kel. Don't let them name you. Promise me." I saved the voicemail, listened to it like a prayer. He was the only one who knew the weight I'd carried, and by then, he was fading. That was the last time he ever said my name with full clarity. I blinked back to the present, the sting in my chest sharper than before. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. I reached for my laptop. Mostly out of habit, I clicked on the Google listing for Maison Varenne, scrolled to reviews. There it was, dated 3 hours earlier. Terrible experience. The server was rude, arrogant, corrected our pronunciation like she was some kind of expert. Hope she gets fired. No name, just anonymous. But the tone, I knew it. That sugary venom could only be Amber's. Or worse, Silas writing it on her behalf, the way men like him always clean up the mess with one hand while lighting another fire with the other. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I closed the laptop. My fingers gripped the edge of the table. My silence hadn't saved me. It hadn't protected me from lies or betrayal or being erased. All it had done was make it easier for them to rewrite me. I pushed my chair back. The floor creaked beneath me. I shrugged off my coat at last, hung it by the door. Steam was still rising from the coffee cup. The apartment was quiet, but something inside me wasn't. That voicemail from my father echoed in my mind again, not as a whisper, but as a command. Don't let them name you. They had tried, again and again, at the restaurant, in the department, in the family speeches and group photos and polite shrugs of memory. But the story wasn't over, and I hadn't disappeared, not yet. The rain hadn't let up when I stepped onto the sidewalk just past noon. It had that quiet, persistent rhythm that felt more like a hum than a storm, the kind that seeps into your sleeves and bones if you stand still too long. I didn't stand still. Downtown Houston bustled around me, umbrellas weaving between taxis, law interns in too tight dress shirts fumbling lunch orders, that smell of hot concrete after hours of soaking. I kept my coat buttoned high and head down as I passed the bronze plaque that read Wexler and Marlin, LLP, Estate Law and Planning. My father had brought us here once, years ago. Before the coughing fits, before the bruises from chemo, before the hospice nurse started showing up at 7 a.m. with a quiet knock and a clipboard. I walked in. The office hadn't changed. Same soft carpets, same ticking wall clock, same framed diplomas with names of men who'd spoken more to Silas than they ever did to me. The receptionist was different, young, cheerful. She wore a deep green blouse and a gold pin that spelled her name, Lena. "Hi there, do you have an appointment?" she asked, typing as she smiled. I nodded. "Kaylin Rowe, I called yesterday. I'm here to pick up a copy of the estate documents, specifically the caregiving declaration filed in 2019. She paused. "One moment, please. R." She disappeared behind a frosted glass door marked Records. I waited. My fingers fidgeted with the zipper on my bag. My shoes left little damp marks on the tile floor. Lena returned a minute later, but her face wasn't cheerful anymore. Just to confirm, you're Kaylin Rowe?" she asked, lowering her voice. "Yes." She hesitated. "We were told you relinquished your claim on that file, that all your authority had been legally reassigned." I felt my stomach shift. "To whom?" She blinked. "It says Silas Rowe." Of course it did, but something in her tone told me she wasn't sure anymore. She stepped aside and let me through. The back room was cooler, more sterile, rows of filing cabinets labeled and locked. A paralegal, mid-40s, professional, polite, led me to a table and handed over a slim manila folder. "This is the copy you requested," he said. I opened it slowly. Inside was the document, a 2-page form with a blue stamp on the bottom, my name typed at the top. The header read, Durable Caregiving and Medical Consent Transfer Agreement. There, near the bottom, was my signature. It looked perfect, too perfect. Every loop, every slant, the elegant K and the soft tail of the E at the end. It looked like my hand, but it wasn't my memory. I hadn't signed this, because I remember what I did sign. I thanked the paralegal, asked for a printed copy, folded it carefully, and left without making a fuss. Outside, the sky was darker now, the wind colder. I didn't rush, I just walked. 4 blocks to the bus, then 2 more to my apartment. My feet felt like they didn't quite touch the pavement. It wasn't fear I carried, it was something colder, clearer. By the time I unlocked my door, the rain had soaked through my sleeves. I peeled off my coat and hung it by the radiator. The apartment was dim, but warm. I placed the forged document on my kitchen table, smoothed the creases, then crossed to the bookshelf near the window. Behind the French novels I hadn't touched in years, I pulled out a small, worn leather-bound journal. It smelled like cedar and ink. I sat down and flipped to the page I knew by heart. October 17th, 2019. The night I found out about Dad's diagnosis. That night, I'd written my name in the corner of the page. Shaky, hurried, still in the hospital gown from visiting hours. That signature, though messy, was real, mine. And it didn't match the one in the file, not even close. The R in row curved differently. The K had a heavier downstroke. And most telling, my habit of dotting the I in my middle name with a small slash instead. A leftover quirk from childhood. It wasn't on the document. I stared at both pages for a long time, side by side. My breath didn't hitch, my hands didn't tremble. This time I didn't cry. Instead, I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. I created a folder, naming it with clean precision, Silas, the truth. Inside, I saved 2 files, a scan of the supposed legal transfer and a photo of the journal entry. I titled them forgedconsent.pdf and originalsignature.png. Then I paused, opened a drawer. Inside was a napkin, folded into a swan. Its paper edges were soft now, from time and handling. It was the first one I'd ever folded, before I knew what silence could cost. I set it beside the laptop. People like Silas think the world bends for those with charm and connections. But I was the one who sat through Dad's last winter. I was the one who read to him in French when the pain got too loud. I was the one who held his hand when he whispered, "Don't let them name you." I knew now. This wasn't about sibling rivalry. It was fraud. And that changed everything. Silas had taken more than credit. He'd stolen control, rewritten paper trails, made me legally irrelevant in the one season of life where I mattered most. But the thing about paper, it keeps quiet, but it never forgets. And I had just found my voice in ink. The invitation had arrived midday, slipped beneath my apartment door inside a plain ivory envelope with no return address. It wasn't dramatic, no calligraphy, no seal. Just a small folded card. Private cultural fundraiser. Saturday, 7 p.m., French Institute of Houston. My name scribbled across the top in a pen I recognized. Eloise. No signature, but I knew her slanted K from the margins of every annotated manuscript she'd ever returned to me during my university days. At first, I'd planned to ignore it. I told myself it was late notice. I didn't have the right clothes. I didn't belong in those rooms anymore. But an hour before the event, as the sun began to dip behind a veil of gray and the street outside glimmered from a drizzle that hadn't yet made up its mind, I reached for the dress I hadn't worn in over a year. Simple black, no lace, no drama, just fabric that fit and moved without apology. I twisted my hair back into a low knot, slipped on the silver earrings my father gave me when I passed my first oral defense, and grabbed the folded swan napkin I kept in the drawer near the door. For courage or closure. I wasn't sure anymore. The French Institute stood tucked behind a row of manicured hedges and art galleries in the Montrose area. Inside, the scent of old books, polished oak, and champagne greeted me like ghosts from a life I used to live. The lighting was soft, filtered through vintage sconces and low chandeliers that turned every reflection into something golden. I stepped in quietly, letting the rhythm of French phrases and laughter wash over me. No one noticed me arrive, and that, oddly, felt like power. I made my way toward the small cocktail tables arranged near the rear of the room. There, near the refreshment cart, I saw him, Silas, in his usual navy blazer, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. His hand rested gently on Amber's lower back, a practiced gesture. She leaned into him, laughing too brightly at something he said. Nothing in his face betrayed discomfort. Nothing hinted at what he'd taken. And yet, as I passed behind a sculpture, I caught it again, that twitch in his left eye, a blink too long. "Kaylin?" I turned. Professor Bernard Fournier stood a few feet away, glass of sparkling water in hand, his hair thinner than I remembered, but his smile still sharp. "I was told you moved back to Paris," he said, delighted. "We all assumed you were continuing your work over there. What a loss for Houston." "Family matters," I said softly. He nodded once. "Ah, the kind of matters no CV ever reflects." We stood in a comfortable quiet before he gestured toward a nearby circle of faculty. "Come, let me reintroduce you. There's a donor tonight who adores linguistic work, especially phonetic reconstruction. You were always the best at making it sound like music." I followed, slowly, carefully. At the table, Bernard's arm around my shoulder felt warm but grounding. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Kaylin Rowe. She studied under me, co-authored most of the content I still teach in my graduate seminars." The group turned, faces I barely recognized, some curious, some politely blank. One woman leaned forward, sharp haircut, pearls, eyes like cooled steel. "And what are you doing now, Ms. Rowe?" she asked, tilting her head. I smiled gently. "I'm a waitress." A beat. "But I used to teach phonetic reconstruction at the Sorbonne." From the corner of the room, I heard a laugh. Too loud, too forced. Silas. He stepped closer, holding a half-empty flute of champagne like it was an extension of his smirk. "She waited tables in Paris, maybe," he said, voice raised just enough to catch attention. "Always had a flair for exaggeration." His tone was teasing, aimed to charm. But then Bernard spoke. "Silas," he said, voice calm but unmistakably pointed. "Your sister co-authored 3 of my syllabi. Her work on nasality in historical Latin is still the backbone of our department's European branch. Half of our curriculum is her." The group fell quiet. Amber's smile faded. Her eyes flicked between Bernard and me, then to Silas. The board member leaned closer, folding her napkins slowly. "Is that true?" I didn't gloat. I didn't shift. I simply lifted my glass, met Amber's gaze, and said, "Funny how people forget the voices that taught them how to speak." Silas didn't respond. He couldn't. His lips parted slightly, but no sound followed. Bernard had turned back to the table, already recounting some anecdote from a conference in Marseille. The group's attention moved with him, like wind bending tall grass. Amber stood beside Silas now, more rigid than before. I stepped away. I didn't need more. Near the window, I found a quiet moment, resting my glass on the sill. Outside, the drizzle had returned, gentle streaks down the glass. In the reflection, I saw myself. Not the girl who folded napkins in the back, not the woman they had erased in footnotes and legal lines, but the one who remembered, who built, who taught, and who had just reminded them all. The night air outside the French Institute was cool and damp, thick with the smell of magnolia and rain-drenched stone. I didn't wait for an Uber. I walked, heels off, shoes dangling from my fingertips, my bare feet soaking up the slick sidewalks, like I needed proof I was still grounded, still real. A few blocks later, I reached Maison Varenne. From across the street, it looked exactly as I remembered it. Golden lights glowing behind the tall, arched windows, soft shadows gliding over linen-covered tables, the sounds of glassware and piano notes escaping whenever the main door opened. I stood still under a street lamp for a moment, just watching, breathing. Tonight I wasn't clocking in through the back entrance with my apron in my bag. Tonight I walked in through the front door. The host didn't recognize me. I'd made the reservation under a different name, Roelle Martin. It was the name of my maternal grandmother, the one who taught me to sew and say no in the same breath. "Right this way, Ms. Martin," the host said. He led me to a small table tucked beside the bar, half shielded by a brass lattice divider. From there, I had a clear view of the center of the dining room, where Silas sat at a large round table, laughing with 3 men in tailored suits and 1 woman with an expression that said she knew how to dominate a boardroom and a courtroom. Amber was next to him, too put together to be relaxed. Her laugh was half a beat too sharp. They were mid-course, plates cleared, wine glasses being refreshed. A small crème brûlée torch sat nearby on a dessert cart, waiting to ignite the finale of Silas's performance. Because that's what this was, his final pitch. He was charming, always had been. Good teeth, even voice, clean lines. But I could see the twitch in his wrist every time he touched his water glass, the way he kept glancing toward the maître d', as if needing reassurance that everything around him was still under control. I waited. I ordered a single glass of Bordeaux and let the stem rest between my fingers. No meal, just time. I didn't stare at him. I didn't watch every word. I just waited until the torch hissed to life and the dessert was lit with caramel fire. That was my cue. I stood, walked across the floor slowly, with the ease of someone who knew the grain of every floorboard beneath her heels. As I approached, I caught Amber's gaze first. Her spine stiffened, her hand moving to her lap, as if to shield herself from something she didn't understand. Silas turned next, confused, then tight-lipped. I stopped at the edge of the table, directly opposite the investor. "Bonsoir," I said, smoothly. "Je peux vous interrompre un instant?" The woman to Silas's left smiled faintly. The investor leaned forward, intrigued. Silas blinked. I turned to him and, in fluid Parisian French, said the line I knew he would recognize but not understand. "La parole oubliée revient toujours à l'oreille qui l'a niée." His forehead creased. Amber glanced at him. What did she say? I answered in English, calm, steady. "That phrase was in the email you claimed to write to the Dean of Sorbonne 3 years ago, the one that supported your nomination to the Cultural Board." I looked around the table. The idiom doesn't appear in English texts. It's obscure, only used in one dialect, and I wrote it. Silence. The man next to the investor coughed into his napkin. Amber's lips parted. "Silas?" I set the manila envelope gently on the table beside the brûlée torch. "I thought this might be helpful," I said. "Inside, you'll find a copy of the legal document filed under my name, giving Silas full medical authority over my father. It is not my signature. A handwriting analysis confirms this." I tapped the envelope. There are also screenshots from the university's email servers. They trace the original draft of that message to an IP address registered under Silas's former firm. The investor leaned back slowly, his fingers laced together on the tablecloth. "I'll need to review those before moving forward," he said, not coldly, not accusing, just firmly. Amber looked like someone had just cracked her favorite mirror. Silas tried to speak. "Kaylin," I held up a hand. "You don't get to say my name now, not after writing it into papers I never saw, not after folding my life into yours and pretending it never existed." He swallowed hard. "You spent years trying to erase me," I said, "but you left the receipt on every lie." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I turned and walked away, not toward the exit, but toward the bar, where I handed the bartender a 20 and said, "You'll want to check table 6. I think they just lost their appetite." He raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Outside, the air was clearer, crisper. I didn't have my heels in my hands this time. I wore them, firmly planted on pavement. No one followed me, no one called out. And I didn't walk out with applause. I walked out with freedom. 2 weeks later, the rain finally stopped. I was sitting by the window in my small apartment, watching golden light seep through the clouds like forgiveness. The last few days had been quiet in a way that didn't ache. The kind of quiet that arrives after a storm and doesn't apologize for staying. A faint breeze curled the edge of the curtain. I wrapped my hands around a warm mug of ginger tea and listened to the hum of a neighbor's old radio through the wall. Some Sinatra, maybe. Something soft. Something that didn't demand anything from me. The board had moved faster than I expected. The documents spoke louder than any accusation I could have shouted. Silas had been removed from the funding initiative before the week ended. The announcement was clinical. Personal inconsistencies with internal compliance standards. No scandal. Just a quiet door closing behind him. Amber quit Maison Varenne a day later. One of the servers told me she didn't say goodbye, just collected her things, deleted every trace of her from the staff group chat, and vanished. I didn't care enough to feel satisfied. Closure isn't always a clap of thunder. Sometimes it's a light rain that doesn't come back. I glanced over at the envelope still sitting on my side table. Inside was everything I'd gathered. Copies, proof, statements, even a list of calls Silas had made under my name. The paper felt heavier now, like its job was finished. I didn't send it anywhere, at least not yet. Instead, I folded my legs under me on the couch and opened my laptop. A new message had arrived a few minutes earlier, from someone named Delia. No subject line, just a short paragraph. I didn't know who you were that night, but I saw you. I saw what you did. And it made me realize I don't have to stay where I'm not respected. I think I'll go back to school. Thank you. I reread it once, then again. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because sometimes silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it's just the space we give someone else to begin. I closed the laptop and stood. Outside, the wet pavement reflected soft pink skies, and the breeze carried the smell of earth and sun-warmed leaves. I stepped out onto my small balcony, the one lined with mismatched terracotta pots and a rusted tin can I used for old papers, dead receipts, and grocery lists I never finished. I reached into the top drawer of my writing desk and pulled out a napkin. It was yellowed and worn at the folds. I remembered the night I folded it, the first shift at Maison Varenne. I'd written my name on it in a rush. They'd misspelled it on the badge again, and I was too tired to correct them. Kaylin! Not even close. I cradled it in my palm for a moment. That swan had meant something then. A reminder that even when you're serving from the edges, you still know how to create beauty. But now I didn't need folded symbols to remind me of who I was. I struck a match. The flame caught quick. The napkin curled inward on itself like it was exhaling after a long performance. The paper blackened, then collapsed into soft gray ash inside the tin. And as it burned, I whispered into the cool evening, "My name is Kaylin Rowe." It didn't echo back, but it didn't have to, because I heard it, clear, grounded, full, and that was enough. Inside, on the hallway wall, a photo hung crookedly. It was the last one taken with my father. He looked tired but proud. His hand was resting on mine. Not Silas's, mine. I walked over, straightened it, and smiled. I never went back to the university. I didn't need the podium anymore. Instead, I took a quiet job with a local nonprofit, one that helped immigrant women prepare for naturalization interviews, language certification, and workers' rights. Some of them spoke 4 languages. Some barely one, but every single one of them carried a name worth saying correctly. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I met them at a small community center near the library. I taught them how to own their voices, how to pronounce boundaries, how to spell strength in the language of systems that weren't built for them. And in return, they reminded me what power sounds like when it has nothing left to prove. That afternoon, as I packed my tote bag for the next day's lesson, I paused to add one last thing, a small notebook. The same one I'd carried into my father's hospice room that first night. The pages were full now, not with pain, but with passages I wanted to pass on. Not revenge, not rage, just resilience. I zipped the bag shut, turned off the lamp, and stood in the doorway as dusk melted into evening. Not once did I look back.